some of the techniques for texturing with the node-based surfacing tool in Lightwave 9. So while that was playing, I spent all that time creating this ball. It was very difficult. I had to draw out a ball. But this will be a good base object to show you some of the texturing abilities in Lightwave 9. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of an older tool called Viper that will allow me to interactively see my texture changes. So I'm going to go ahead and load up Viper, and we'll just keep it over here in this corner. Actually, I'm going to make it a little smaller so that we can use the screen real estate that we have here differently. Open up the surface editor, and I'm going to do I just have to do one render. And the way Viper works is it'll store this render in a buffer so that I can interactively see what I'm doing with my surfaces. Now, traditionally, Lightwave, and we still have it, it's a layer system for surfacing. And basically, for each one of my channels, I've got color, luminosity, diffuse, specularity, and so on. And I can click the T for texture editor, and I can build a system of layers that will blend together to create a surface. And I can use image maps, procedural textures like mathematically based textures, and gradients, and blend those all together very similar to the way that you would blend layers in Photoshop. Not only is it similar, we also have the Photoshop blending modes for those layers. So this is the way that we've been using, this is the way we've been texturing in Lightwave for years. And we just introduced the node-based surfacing tool. And for me, it's completely changed the way I work, and it's sped up my workflow. And so that's what I'd like to show. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the node editor. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that we've got our channels here. There's no difference, color, color, luminosity, luminosity, except we have some more channels that we didn't have before, like diffuse shading, specular shading, and others like that. So let's take a look at how we can go in and start texturing using this system. The first thing I'm going to do is I'll start with the procedural. We're used to using procedurals in our 3D apps and in our layer system. So I'm going to go to 3D textures. We'll pick turbulence. And I'm just going to plug the turbulence node into the color channel, right? So I can instantly see in Viper, I can see what's happening there. But I'm going to pop open the settings. Now, if you're used to working in the layer system, well, this is going to look very familiar. It's the same options that you're used to having, except there's a few more that we can play with. So I'm going to change the background color, and I'll pick something that we can see like blue, and then I'll pick something a little different like red. And so now I can start changing my colors. Well, I can do that before. But what I couldn't do before, and this is a big time saver, is from this same node, I'm just going to plug the bump into the bump. And what I can do is then, oh, sorry, I plugged it into the color highlights, into the bump, and I get my bump, right? Now, what I would have to do with the layer system is copy that information, close down that texture editor, go to the bump channel, open up that texture editor, and paste that information. So I could use the same settings, but it's a longer process. And then I'd have to do the same thing if I wanted to just do add specularity. So I'm using the same node and just multi-linking it. But then I can take it a step further and have even more control. I'll go ahead and close this so that we can take advantage of our real estate here. And let's load up Crackle. It's another procedural. And for this Crackle, I'm going to feed its color into the background color of this procedural. So now instead of just having a color, I have a procedural texture that's driving the background color. So I can double click this, which is the same as just popping this over, but I'm going to use the real estate this way. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to blue. And we'll change this to something like magenta, just so that we can see it. Okay? So now this texture is feeding into the background color. I can also, in the layer system, I'd have to, if I wanted to displace the procedural, I'd have to add another layer and then set the blending mode to texture displacement. Well, all I have to do here is grab the bump and feed it into position, and it's going to displace the turbulent texture here. Right? So now I only have two nodes, but I've got my entire surface. Instead of opening up three different channels in the texture editor and then having multiple layers, I'm doing it all with two nodes. So this is a really fast way to work. Now, what I can do that I really like is I can just pop this off. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it down here. Now, one of the nice things about this node editor compared to others is that if I save this out and I come back, these nodes will still be here, even though they're not linked to anything. In most node editors, if it's not linked, it's gone. The reason why I don't like that is because I like to experiment and play with my textures to try and figure out what I'm going for, what I want to get there, and then once I figure that out, I go, okay, well, this is good, but could I make it better? So I can just move that aside and start working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab grab a gradient, okay, and I'm going to plug that into the color. Now, immediately it's going to go black because my gradient right now has no color information. It's just got black on one key. So I'm going to change this to white, okay, and I've got, for input, I've got X coordinate, Y coordinate, Z coordinate, slope, and incidence. I'm going to set it to incidence. Now, if you notice, there's an input channel here, and we're going to be taking a look at that here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and set my type of gradient to step for this key, and I can change it for each individual key, but I'm going to set this to step, and I'm going to paint this blue. Okay, and then I'm going to create another one, set that to step, and I'm going to paint that black. Okay, so now I have a basic eye texture, right? Now, the beauty of this setup is that I'm using incidence angle, and basically what that is you've got 0 here and 90 degrees here. The camera is always going to be pointing at 90 degrees to this surface for the incidence angle. What that allows me to do is set up eyes on a character, and no matter where I move the camera, the character is always going to be looking at it. I don't have to animate the eyes that way. But what I can do that I couldn't do before, I could not do this in the layer system, is I'm going to select this key right here on this gradient, and right now we only have 3 channels to work with to input into the gradient. Unless I show output, and I can show output for all the keys, but for this one, I'm just going to show the output for basically the iris on my eye. Okay, so I can close that, and now we see that we have channels for color, position, and alpha for that key, and I can do that for all my keys. But in this case, I'm going to take advantage of this crazy texture we created here, and I'm going to feed that into the color. And now, instead of just having a single color that's on that gradient, I have the entire flow that I generated earlier, right, all being fed into not the entire gradient, but just this key right here, right? Now, another thing that I can do with the gradient, let me go ahead and I'm going to pop this off. But again, I kind of like that eye. I might want to use it later. So I'm just going to pull this down here. And I can fit as much stuff as I want in this, right? So I don't mind. It's kind of like a workspace, a clipboard that I can just start dragging stuff to. Okay? So let's add another gradient. And I'm going to feed that into color. And let's set up something like red to yellow. I'm using all my primary colors today. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and set that to slope. So slope is going to hit the top, and as it fades down, and I can change it just by moving the position of the key. Okay? But one of the things that I couldn't do, and I still can't do in the layer system,